Marwa, thanks so much for that. It's very real and makes, I hope, for people a little bit more tangible. I'm going to kick off with the first question. You had mentioned in the past that there's also a relationship between the U.S. and Israel in terms of what the U.S. is also using for its tech. In terms of oppressions and weapons of war. Would you just elaborate on that a little bit? And I want to add in a separate little piece to this, which is, you live in neither Palestine nor the US right now, but as a member of the diaspora, I wonder also how this affects you in Germany as well. And if you're seeing, from your vantage point, any kinds of use of these weapons and tools.
Yeah, I mean, Germany has been, quite frankly, a nightmare since October 7th. It's been so before, but the German authorities and the media went hysterical. There's virtually no open space to have a constructive conversation or a debate, let alone showing solidarity with Palestine. Protests in the first month have been banned. We've been attacked by the police. And even when protests are allowed, signs like "Stop the Genocide" or certain chants have been criminalized. Even Jewish allies have been detained and prosecuted. It's really, I'm sorry to say, it's really a shit show in Germany. But to your point around the relationship between Israel and the US and also the EU in terms of military tech and exchange and transfers. So because Palestine is a laboratory for Israeli military tech and surveillance tech, Israel, as a result, prides itself on being a tech nation. And it is really no coincidence that Israel is a top exporter of surveillance and spyware technologies, and it is also a leader in drone supplies. I believe there's a statistic from 2017 that points to the fact that Israel's drone sales make up 60% of drone sales worldwide. And here I want to say two things. One is that I've mentioned the role of US-based companies or tech companies in investing and providing services and infrastructure to the Israeli authorities and occupation. But then there's also the transfer of those technologies from Israel to the US and the EU. For example, one of the first drones that the US used to police its southern border with Mexico was manufactured by one of the biggest defense manufacturers, Israeli defense manufacturers, Elbit Systems. It is the same company that has been deploying drones in the Gaza Strip and also experimenting with drones that resulted in the killing of Palestinians. The same story in the EU. I think in 2021, the EU has awarded a large contract worth of 100 million euros to Elbit Systems and also to the Israel Aerospace Industrial to man EU borders, so giving it to Frontex to monitor EU borders against migrants and refugees. So this is to say that what happens in Palestine really does not stay in Palestine, and the transfer of equipment and also a transfer of skills. I mean, I'm sure and I hope that as part of these discussions, you will delve into the training of the US police departments and law enforcement by the Israeli military, and how that militarizing the US law enforcement meant more violence and the transfer of oppression tactics, really. So there's definitely a relationship to interrogate there. And as activists and as advocates, we should be exposing those links. We should be exposing also the supply chain from the investors, from the corporate investors, the private equities, and the people responsible in feeding and nourishing and financing this industry that not only uses Palestinian bodies and land to experiment, but also exports and reaps profits by violating human rights worldwide.
Thank you for that. And I think it's hard to overstate the importance of Israel's oppression of Palestine in the rest of the sort of digital weapons and digital weapons of war and oppression that are global, and precisely why Free Palestine is an intersectional issue around the world. You mentioned the Mexico wall, and in my introduction last week, I mentioned the digital walls work that Stop the Wall has been doing. And in 2017, that was the major moment for the digital wall, or the World Without Walls movement, because it was clear that Mexico and Palestine had this commonality. And so there's a history there. And you're right to point out that there's Palestine solidarity in the US is often very strong because of the narrative around police brutality as well. So always continuing to strengthen those. And I see that we've got some really great links for people coming into the chat for those who want to know more. There was a question earlier around censorship on social media. I think there's a lot of interest in that. And it's something that you talked about towards the end. So I thought I would maybe attempt to give you a question around social media censorship. So you talked about the absolute destruction and mass killing in Gaza, and that as Palestinians under Israeli apartheid, it becomes a habit to feel surveyed, right? Whether you're in the West Bank or you're in Gaza, to be part of this test lab, that's part of the strategy of psychological war and of destroying hope. Can you offer some advice on how do you resist this, or how does resistance happen? Where do you get your strength from? And what are some of the strategies for international solidarity that you would want us engaging in with you?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I want to say that whenever youngsters protest in Palestine, sometimes the first thing they attack and set on fire are surveillance cameras, and particularly in Jerusalem, because they know that this is the first threat they should remove in order to protest peacefully. And because this has become part of our understanding of the world and our experience living in a heavily surveilled territory, people use very basic ways to make sure that their identity is anonymized. Have you ever seen the picture of the archetype picture of a Palestinian being completely veiled with a kufiya? That is a response to surveillance, because you need to make sure that your face is not recognizable, because the moment you leave the protest, or even during, you would be arrested. And with Israeli detention, you know that if you are lucky to be if you're lucky to be tried, then you will go to a military court with a conviction rate of 99.4 or 0.7%. And if not, they will be put under administrative detention, held indefinitely without a trial or a charge. So this is just an anecdote to share from everyday life, how people resist those technologies on an everyday basis. I think for me, as someone who works on digital rights, and for those who listen to us who come from the tech sector or work in the tech sector, it is really important to interrogate a number of things. One, the technologies that are built, and how they can exacerbate, fuel, and reproduce systems of apartheid, discrimination, and racism, and protest those, and especially at big tech companies that continuously tout the line that they respect human rights, that they comply with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, that they take their obligations seriously, blah, blah, blah. in reality, what companies care about is profit. And Project Nimbus is just a clear example of that. Despite protests from tech workers inside of the company, outside of the company, they're not budging, which means that their number one priority is profit. Now, violations of international law, atrocity crimes, that is a footnote. The second thing I would say is documentation of those patterns of abuse. And I say that because since I started working on content moderation issues back almost a decade ago, whenever you mentioned this, you would be questioned. You would be even questioned by human rights organizations themselves. Like, are you really sure that this is systematic censorship? Is it really at a scale? If yes, like what are your what's your data? And up until this point, companies still respond to us with those remarks, as in, one, these are technical issues. It's never intentional. For example, Meta says, like, our intention is never to censor or to suppress someone's voice, quite the opposite. And then when you show them the evidence, because we learned the trick, they will say, well, it's not of a scale, like it's not as big as you pretended it is to be. And so, but we've come a long way. We've come a long way because in 2021, after a similar bout of censorship in response to the Sheikh Jarrah protests, we pressured the company to conduct a human rights due diligence. They did, because we no longer believed whatever claims they threw back at us, and we said, clearly there is something wrong and you need to investigate it. And the results were clear. I mentioned over moderation of Palestinian content, under moderation of Hebrew content. They didn't even have classifiers to detect and remove hate speech in Hebrew. Guess why? Because I don't think the safety of Palestinians of a great risk, of a great concern to them, and therefore the financial and the technical resources needed for that were not provided or given. The reason why I mentioned this example is because I think primarily due to documentation, we've managed to break through this denial and also make it very clear that how systematic this issue is, to the point where companies, even if they deny it, we know that this is a legitimate issue that we can publicly discuss. I think many years ago, there were less spaces like the one we're having now, less conversations that we're having now. So the more documentation we have to expose this discrimination and violations of human rights is really important. Finally, I guess for non-Palestinians, for allies, I think protesting, also documenting and exposing links between the Israeli military industry and your respective home countries is key, and drawing parallels, as we see in the links shared in the chat, to emphasize again, as you said, Mallory, that Palestine is an interconnected struggle. It's not just an issue that you may engage with if your moral compass compels you to, but it's an issue that will really come and haunt you in your own home country through a number of ways, but one of which is indeed through surveillance technologies and technologies of violence and oppression.
Thank you for everything, Marwa. Really appreciate all of your insights and the stories you've shared, the sentiments you've shared. And I think we're going to wrap up there. I want to thank also our participants who threw out some really great questions. We didn't get to everything, but I think that over the series, we'll start accumulating more and more of these similar questions, which just demonstrates, how timely and useful these talks are to a really, I think, engaged and eager tech community that wants to help make this better. And this just helps, I think, orient a little bit that excitement and that eagerness within the sort of context of Palestine struggle and solidarity that's been happening for many years. I know you're a very well-respected figure in that movement. And it's a pleasure to be your colleague in the digital human rights space as well. We're different organizations, but working on similar things. So thanks again for joining us. This will be posted online. We invite you all to share it. Please also note that next week we will have same time, same place. You can register at the same link for Cher Heaver, who's going to talk about the startup economy in Israel and how it's really shutting down. So shut down startup. Thanks so much. With that, we'll close the webinar. Thanks, Marwa.
Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, everyone.